Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Sump. I'm our Illinois and Iowa Mastercam account executive. And then I also have Joe Julian on the line, who is our Cimco sales and applications engineer. And today we're going to be going over a little bit of licensing and product configuration for Mastercam and the Cimco product. So just a brief overview of the agenda today. I'm going to go over all the Mastercam portions. So I'm going to go over a bit of the module configurations and options, as well as some differences of the hardware licensing that we're phasing out, as well as our new software licensing, and then getting into it a bit about the network licenses on the software side, as well as some features like the license borrowing that's now available through that type of licensing. Then I'll hand it over to Joe, and he'll go over the Cimco modules a little more in depth, as well as how the updated version 8 and going forward license keys work as they switch their licensing up a bit from the V7 and previous versions of Cimco. So just a quick overview of the way Mastercam is structured for people that aren't aware, or maybe just a refresher on what you may currently have and how you can possibly reconfigure, or if you need to add additional functionality to your system. Mastercam is split into what we call core and add-on products. So any what we call core seat is required, and then you can add or upgrade to it from there. So that's the short list of what we call the core products. So you got design, mill, lathe, wire, and router. And then depending on the product, there's different levels of those. So the mill has the mill 2D, mill 3D, and then the multi-axis, which is technically an add-on. Lathe is really more dependent on what products you are pairing with the lathe seat in order to get the functionality. And I have a couple of quick PDFs, and I'm happy to send these as well if people aren't familiar with exactly the functionality between the levels. But this is just a quick overview matrix of all the different features that are included. So there's the mill, or mill 2D as we call it, and then the mill 3D. One of the big enhancements that we covered in our 2022 rollout webinars was the 3D OptiRough was added to the base mill level. So if you need to do quick roughing of a part, instead of picking out individual areas to pocket like you'd normally do with like the 2D high-speed tool pass, you can just window it and go with the full OptiRough. And then all the 3D machining is included in the mill 3D package. And then the way the lathe is structured is lathe by itself will handle all your standard X and Z turning, plus what I call basic or axial C and Y axis machining. Mastercam's menu, when you're inside of Mastercam, will show the tab of tool paths is just called C axis, but really there's a switch in there where you can do C or Y axis, but you're limited to single pass contour type tool pass and drilling with C and Y axis. It's more when you pair one of the mill levels when you get full C and Y axis. You know, think of doing a pocket on the OD or a pocket on the face of a turning part. Really, you're doing milling style tool pass, but in a lathe environment when you have that sort of configuration. And if you have to do 3D machining with the C or Y axis, that's when you would want to pair the lathe with a mill 3D seat as shown here. And then once you get beyond that is when you start getting into different add-ons that are available through Mastercam, as well as some third-party ones I'll briefly touch on here. So multi-axis is the most common add-on to mill 3D customers. That gives you all your 4 and 5 axis simultaneous tool pass. And I have had questions before where either customers add multi-axis or they have it, and then they click on Blade or Port Expert, and then they still don't have access to it. So Blade and Port Expert are actually separate add-ons in addition to the multi-axis package. And one thing that a lot of people don't know is you can technically add Blade Expert or Port Expert onto just a mill 3D seat. So I have some customers that have very specialized machining operations, like especially in the performance racing industry for the Port Expert product, where you could potentially just get a mill 3D seat and then add Port Expert to it, because that's the only 5-axis machining you're doing, is you're doing, a lot of head porting. But the multi-axis, gives you a lot more flexibility to do all the other multi-axis toolpaths. And the same applies to Blade Expert. Really, both of those tools are designed to automate that type of machining. You can do blades and ports with the regular multi-axis, but the example I'd like to use is, it would take me, I'm not exactly a Mastercam pro, but I'm slightly dangerous. I can do a port in, I'd say, 90 minutes to 2 hours with just regular multi-axis, where with Port Expert, that gets down to the 5 to 10 minute range. Then an add-on to, if you have mill and lathe already, say you're doing some live tool machining, an upgrade to that is our new mill turn product, which we've touched on that in a lot of webinars, but really that adds full machine simulation as well as multi-turret syncing, pinch and balance turning to that style of equipment. So think of like a Integrex with an upper B and a lower turret, or multi-turret DMG Mori style machines and similar. One add-on that doesn't get used too often is the art product. So that's more for converting pictures into wireframe geometry, and then you can add depth to it. It's kind of like what the name implies, an artistic type add-on that a lot of our router customers choose to go with. If you're, think you're doing fancy graphics and things like that on customer parts, it actually has its own set of specific tool paths designed for artistic and, really getting crisp 3D images on material. The ProDrill product actually used to be a third-party add-on, but it was integrated into Mastercam a handful of years ago. That's really geared towards customers that are doing a lot of hole drilling, especially with custom form tools. So think of like a hydraulic manifold and similar type parts where you really need to get into multi-step, multi-stage drilling. The Mastercam added in 2021, I believe, the advanced drilling feature that adds gun drilling style tool paths and similar. So we haven't seen ProDrill as popular as it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, but there is still a niche where it's certainly a very productive tool to add into Mastercam. So if you do any drilling like the examples that I gave there, feel free to reach out. And I mentioned earlier with the Cimco probing product, there's also the Productivity Plus product. It's only for mills still currently, but it's basically Renishaw's probing plus software right inside of Mastercam. So Joe does all of our probing sales. So if you have any questions on, which one of those would be a better fit, if you want to program the probes right inside of Mastercam, he can certainly talk through you with how each of those work and the pluses and minuses to both. Then lastly, what I want to cover as far as the module configurations go is all the different third-party add-ons to Mastercam. So those of you that are already Mastercam customers, being the most popular cam product out there, a lot of other companies are able to use our API and integrate different features into Mastercam. So I listed some of the most popular ones there. Verisurf does a lot of inspection. So with either touch probes, laser scanners, any sort of even just regular CMM style machines, they have a module called Automate that can program those. So there's a lot of ways to program inspection right inside of Mastercam, as well as do reverse engineering. Mold Plus is for our mold customers. So for creating cavities, cores, draft, anything that would be specific to designing a mold, the Mold Plus software offers. Another popular add-on to their software is called their Electrode Maker, where it can extrude electrodes based off of your model and then add all the additional holders and extensions and other things that are involved with electrode making. One of the newer ones out there is called A Plus from a company called Cam Manufacturing. We've actually had a couple customers recently add this on. Basically what it is it's a 3D printing type application for Mastercam, but it's mainly for the deposition style heads that are being able to either machines. So companies like DMG Mori, and I think Mazak has one now where the CNC machine can actually deposit metal in an additive sense and then go back and remachine critical areas on the same machine. They have a whole set of tool paths geared toward laying that material down before you have to go back and machine the critical areas. The last one I want to touch on is the Robot Master. So if you have any robotic equipment that you're doing spraying of paint or any other sort of sprayable material, welding, trimming, applications like that, Robot Master is a fully simulated programmable version to control robotics versus using a teach pendant. So getting into the licensing side of the webinar here. So a lot of you may still be on the hardware-based licensing, the HASP keys as we call it. I have the two versions there, the older style and then the newer style USB licenses. I had a style like this for years. I've since switched to a software license for my laptop. And new licenses going forward are all software-based. So you either have a software-based single seat that would replace these purple style keys, or there's the red USB network, NetHasp licenses that we've gone with software licensing. You can technically still get these USB keys, but they're about $1,000 because they're out of production and we have limited supply, I guess. And that's what Mastercam settled on in the price. So most people have been moving away or not, it's not worth paying for a key that you could potentially lose anyway. And going through to the software licensing, most people have been going these days with the network license. And when I get to the borrowing portion of this, you'll see why that really the single seat licenses really aren't as attractive as they used to be. So I noted there, you can still get USB keys for that fee, but I don't recommend anybody paying that. And I saw John's question, you can still continue using the HASP. That is correct. We'll continue to support these HASPs as long as they're still supported in systems. And, we don't see the USB-A standard going away anytime soon. Any of you that have been around long enough, Mastercam keys originally used to be parallel port, 32-pin, printer port style keys. And then we moved to the USB keys probably around the turn of the century, I guess you could call it. So all those keys will continue to be supported and licensed in Mastercam, so you don't have to worry about them going away if you already have them. That was a good question, John. Thanks. Going forward too, if you want to get a network license, you can only get them via software, but really with the way servers have been going and having virtual servers, it's really a pain in the butt, for lack of a better term, to get a hardware key to work on a virtual server. You have to get some additional hardware that mimics an IP address for the USB device, and it's really a big pain, where the new software licensing has native support for virtual servers, and then it's really no problem. Network licenses do have a $200 per what we call core product license fee. So if you do convert to all single seat keys to network licensing, just be mindful of however many core products you have, there's a fee to switch over to network licensing. And any current USB licensed customers can convert to software licenses if they so desire. Mastercam normally charges a $100 fee per seat to convert as just an administration fee. I got a little approval from them for anyone on the webinar. And if you mention the webinar and email sales or any of us here at ShopWare, we'd be happy to convert you over to software and waive the fee. Just be sure to mention that you were on the webinar today, and Michelle is aware, who does all these at our office, to waive the fee for you. Just be mindful that if you're going from single seat licenses to network licenses, there's still that network license fee. So getting into more of the details on the software licensing. So the single seat licenses have a single activation, but the way that they can be flexible is that they can be activated and deactivated as many times as you need. And the only time that internet is required is at either initial activation or when it is deactivated. Because I know a lot of customers like to not have access to their employees to have internet all day long. So it's only required at those two times. You technically don't need internet ever, as there's an offline option, but the offline option adds a lot of delay to the process, because when you do the offline option, it creates what we call a license requisition file. And then we have to email that to Mastercam. They send us back an activation file that you manually load into the system. And it just takes a lot longer, because I'm going to go through a quick example here of how that single seat licensing works. So I just search here. If I have Mastercam installed, I just search for Activation Wizard and it'll pop up. And right now I have a reseller license loaded, but I just want to go through what the process looks like. So say I wanted to use my reseller license down on my computer in the basement. I would just say online activation, deactivation. I want to deactivate my existing license. It's a Mastercam retail license, so that's the only one I have on my computer. I want to say deactivate, and then it says, are you sure you want to deactivate? I say okay, and then it contacts Mastercam over the internet and deactivates the license. It also gives me a copy of what my license number is. I have a temporary license that I generated just to show you what the activation process looks like here. So now that my license deactivated, let's say I'm going to a different computer in the shop. If I want to activate it there, I just go back to the activation wizard and say the same process again: online activation, deactivation, activate a new license. I agree, say okay. I can paste in this. There we go. Now I got the correct digit. Sorry about that. So I just say activate, and it tells me what products are being activated. And the only thing with these two is that the software licensing technically came out with Mastercam 2019. So versions 2019 and newer are supported by these licenses. Another tip about these is your license number and activation code technically always stay the same. So for customers that are converting from hardware to software licensing, we can maintain your same license number. So if you have custom post processors that are binned to your license, that number stays the same. So you don't need to get the post regenerated. And say you're on temporary licenses because you're currently processing payments with us, and then the permanent license is technically issued after the bill is paid in full, that number stays the same. So really all you have to do is activate the license a second time. So say I'm on a temporary license that expires, like this one expires March 26th. Say I pay my bill and I get an email from customer service saying that my permanent license is available. You can run the same. They'll send you a copy of your license number and the activation code, but you just have to enter it in and always just say new activation, and it'll just overwrite the temporary license with the permanent one. And yeah, Eric is happy that he can get rid of his old license server that had a USB port that he doesn't need anymore. So yeah, that's a nice benefit of the software licenses. So getting back to the PowerPoint here, it always swaps to those. So talking more about the floating licenses. The activation process is exactly the same as it is with the single seat licenses. You have your W number and then whatever your license number is plus the activation code. You have much more robust license administration and monitoring. So if there's any IT people on here that have had to deal with the NetHasp license activity monitor, it can be very slow and takes forever to see who's exactly using what. And it can take minutes to populate who's on there. You really don't have to deal with that anymore with the new network licenses. So instead of having a separate application to manage the licenses, it's installed with every version of Mastercam, regardless if you have the software licensing now or not. But if I click on the code meter application here. So it installs down in your system tray, and it's either going to be a gray ball like this or a green ball. It's technically a little CM logo there. If I click on that, it brings up the Code Meter Control Center, and then I click on Web Admin here, and then it pops up in my browser with the administration console. So a couple things you can do from here. If you're on a network license, I can go under license monitoring and go to sessions, and then it'll pull up, I'm technically not connected to a network license right now, but I would be able to see all the different sessions based on what modules, IP address, and computer name of what people are using. And to say I had a network license on here, in order to set it up to broadcast throughout the network of the shop, it's also a very simple process. I would just go to configuration here, go to server, and then server access. And then I would just switch it here to, for some reason, the dark mode, there was an update to Chrome today and it's messing up. I have to probably turn that off. But you basically set network server to enable, and then you're good to go. And you just have to make sure if you have any firewalls in place that that's the port number to set that up. But what we do is anytime someone does a network license, we'll send you a setup document, and also our tech support staff is happy to walk you through setting up these software licenses. So this little 2-page PDF basically walks you through. So if I'm on a server and I don't have Mastercam installed, you have to install the Code Meter software as well as the license activation wizard that we went through a little bit ago. And it walks you through what to do, how to activate the license, how to enable the server access, and then how to access the server on the client side of the computer. And you necessarily don't even have to do this second step. As kind of a tip, is you can use the Mastercam launcher to create a icon that specifically looks for the software license. So I have this icon here to set up. I have another computer in our house technically running as a server right now. So it's just telling Mastercam to look at the network license, and I can launch Mastercam off of that. And you'll see this will populate here. It's giving me the warning because I've only launched this 1 or 2 times. But it's a base 2D mill license and a lathe license that I have running off another laptop. That is a network license internal to my network here. And what I didn't show in that web admin there is there's also what we call wide area network support with these new licenses as well. So a lot of customers are used to VPNing in to access the licenses, which still works with this format of licensing. But if you have a wide area network set up, it would also work that way. The short story is, as long as your client computer running Mastercam like I am here, if you're able to ping the IP address of the server hosting the Mastercam license, you'll be able to access Mastercam, whether that be through a VPN or through a wide area network. I have a couple other questions here. Jody asks, we are converting and using a temp license. When I added a new temp license, it kicked someone out. Anytime you're updating a license, it's technically restarting the license server. So anytime the license server gets restarted, even if I went into the process here and did process restart code meter service, anytime I'm activating a license, it does the same thing. It should, anytime the license gets disconnected or not found, or even say the network goes down, Mastercam should give them the option to save what they're currently working on, and then they could just reopen Mastercam. But typically you're only updating the license once or twice a year, so it shouldn't happen very often. And another question from Sean here is, can I run the network license server on a Windows 10 Pro that is also a client? Yes. So the computer hosting the license can also be technically a client of the license. So the other laptop I have technically running this license that I'm using to demo here, that's a network license. It also has Mastercam installed, and I could launch Mastercam from there while it's still hosting the license as a network server. Just when I'm on the license administration portion of it, the computer that, let's say my computer that I'm using here now that you guys are seeing, if my computer was technically the license server, my current server here would be localhost, where this laptop VF908 is technically my server at 1.29 IP address. I wouldn't want to select that if I was using that laptop. I would just want to use the local host as my license server. So that was a good question as well, Sean. Thanks. So the last option I want to go through here is the license borrowing. So let me pull up just one quick slide about this. Is anyone that has a network license, it is technically capable of borrowing. You must be connected to the server in order to borrow. So I had a customer ask me this yesterday when I was on site. They wanted to use Mastercam from home, and they do have VPN set up, but their VPN isn't the most reliable. It seems to cut in and out fairly often. So instead of always staying connected to the VPN, they could connect to the VPN, borrow a license, and then disconnect from the VPN and be able to use Mastercam as normal, as if they have a local license installed. For a while, when the borrow utility was in beta, it was a separate download. But now with 2022 and newer, the borrow utility is just included as part of the Mastercam install. So let me walk through how that works a little bit here. And Sherry, I'll get to your question in a second on how you can limit what access people have to certain modules in Mastercam in 1 second. So let me run through the borrowing process here quickly. So I'll close out of Mastercam. And if you go in your Mastercam directory here, so just go through your list and look for Mastercam. And then under Mastercam licensing utilities, you have the license borrow utility. So whether I'm local on the network or if I'm remote connected to a VPN, it'll see my license server. So that's that same 1.29 that was coming up when I was in the web admin. And it will list all the products I have available, how many are available, how many are currently borrowed, and how many are currently in use. And if they are in use, it'll give the IP address and computer name of the licenses that are currently in use. And the one thing you want to be mindful of is, by default, the borrow period is set to 10 days. So the way that borrow period works is, I have it set to 0.1 days right now. So 0.1 days is about 2.5 hours, roughly. If I have it set to that short of a time, or whatever I have the timer set to, once that timer expires, the license is automatically returned to the server. So there's no interaction required on the end user's part. So it'll just automatically return. Like I get that question when I'm talking to customers about this, is, say I need to do some programming at home that night, I can, borrow the license on my laptop and bring it home. And if I set it to, say, 0.3 days, that's about 8 hours roughly, I can use it when I program at home, and then sometime overnight while I'm sleeping, it just automatically gets returned to the server. If I set the timer longer than that and the license is still technically borrowed, by the time I get back, I can always manually return the licenses to the server as well. So if I say, I have it set to 1 day or 0.1 days here, say I only need to do mill programming remotely, I can click on Mastercam Mill here and say borrow licenses. And it's going to warn me and say, hey, borrowed licenses are no longer available to other users. Do you want to continue? Yes. It'll also warn you if it's the last available of that type of product that say, hey, you're attempting to borrow the last available seat of Mastercam Mill. Do you want to continue? Yes. And I say, okay. And then it basically what it's doing in the background here is it's generating a local license for me to use on my computer here. So now that the license is borrowed, if I go to my code meter here, you'll see that I have that local license now installed on my computer. So if I went and launched regular Mastercam, not looking at the network icon down here, but just regular Mastercam launcher, it's going to pop up with that temporary license number, and you'll see it says borrowed there in parentheses, and then it'll launch Mastercam with just that product that I borrowed. So once Mastercam loads up here, you can see if I go to the machine tab, I just have that base mill license that I borrowed. Like if I tried to do, like a 3D blend or something like that, well, I guess you're still allowed single surface programming, so it's not going to yell at me. But if I tried to do multi-surface programming, it would say I only have a 2D mill license. And then say I'm done and I don't want to necessarily wait for the timer to expire. I can just go back to my borrow utility, and instead of going to the borrow tab, I can just go to the return tab and say I want to return that license, or I can say return all licenses, and then it returns it. It's going to tell me, hey, it's no longer available locally on this computer. Do you want to return it to the server? Sure. So then it'll go through and return that license, and then I'm good to go. It no longer appears. You see my license app here went from a green ball where there's an active license to this gray, saying that there's no local license available. So to get to Sherry's question here, how can I limit access to what users have on a given computer? The easiest way to do that is to use in that same directory in your start menu here. If I go to Mastercam, not in the licensing utilities folder, but in the regular Mastercam folder here, there's what's called the Mastercam launcher. There's also a Word doc we can send you with this, as you don't necessarily need to use this. You can do it via it's basically inserting what we call command line switches into here. So right now it's reading off that network license that I have on the other laptop here. And I have 1 mill and 1 lathe available. So say I have a user that is only doing 2-axis lathe programming, and I don't want them to have access to the mill license. I can say lathe, I want it to be active, and I want the mill to be inactive. So I can say inactive here, and then I could say, it's technically a network license. So I want to switch mill to inactive and lathe is active, and I can say create shortcut. So I can say create shortcut here, and I can say Mastercam lathe only. Say okay. Now it's going to create that icon on my desktop. And now if I go to launch Mastercam, it will only pull the lathe license. So you can see here it says mill is disabled and lathe is active. And then for that particular user, I would just I would delete any default icons, because the way Mastercam is set up out of the box is it's going to want to, anytime I start a plain Jane session of Mastercam, is it's going to pull as much functionality as it sees on the network license. So if I have mill, lathe, wire, etc. on my network license and just launch off the default icon, it's going to pull everything that's available that I can use as a single user. If I have 5 seats of mill and launch it, it's not going to pull all 5, but it would pull the max functionality that's available. But I can use the launcher and customize the icon so each user is set up the way we have it. And we've done that for a couple customers as kind of a support. The icon is really the same from computer to computer. So if you have multiple people that pull certain configurations from Mastercam, you can basically copy those icons and put them on a server somewhere and deploy them to other users so that they have the same launching experience, so to speak. So now if I go to the machine tab here, you can see I only have lathe available, even though this network license is technically capable of both mill and lathe. So I hope that answers your question, Sherry. And I think that's really all I had on the Mastercam licensing side. So I'm going to pass things over to Joe here.
So yeah, again, guys, Matt kind of gave me a quick introduction at the beginning here, but my name's Joe. I do manage the Cimco product here for us at ShopWare, as well as the probing side as well. So anything on the Productivity Plus or the Cimco probing side. So just jumping right in, we are going to be covering today just types of licenses that we're going to be looking at. One's going to be the standalone licensing, and one's going to be our software licensing. So as the slide's shown here, we are going to as well cover the Cimco probing licensing differences, the MDM licensing, as well as a quick overview of the offline activations. So I'll just jump right in here. So let me minimize this out. So we've got a few different options, like we said here. So I'll go into my folder here, and I have an example of our standalone key, which we'll work on first. So I'll go ahead and just double click this license, and you can see the products are going to show in our license file viewer. So what you can do is actually just hit install license file, and the system will just give you a prompt saying that was successfully installed. So at this point, we can go into any of our Cimco products based off of the license that you just installed and open those up. So for instance, this license just included a Seed of Cimco edit. So if I go to open this up, it's going to give us this window, and this is the new version of this. You might not be quite familiar with it. It looked a little bit different in older versions of version 8. But all we have to do is go into key file and say find key file, and that license that we just activated here, all we need to do is double click that, say OK, and then our Seed of Cimco will open up. So you can see here it says license to webinar test. So at that point, that's just essentially taking one of the activations out of your code, essentially. So if you have 4 seats on a standalone license, that's going to equal 4 activations. So let's say you're replacing a computer that was running Cimco Edit on a standalone license. All you need to do would be to call into the office. We can reset a license if you're moving computers. And then that same key that you just activated can be moved over to that new computer, and we can activate it again by installing it through that process. So that's really all that kind of goes into it on the standalone licensing. It's pretty straightforward. So what I can do is kind of reset where my licensing is coming from. So by default, the license is located in C program data and then Cimco AS. So what I'll do is I'll just delete that out so we can kind of go through the license or the software manager license. So at this point, we're completely set back to normal at this point. So we can go in, and I do have our networkable key from ShopWare here. So we'll go ahead and try to install that. So you can see we've got a license server here, Cimco network license server, and then all the products that we have enabled in our license. So I'll go ahead and say install here, and we'll go ahead and restart that. You can see that this license service, this is going to run in the background. We'll display where that shows up inside of here. So I can right click, go into my task manager, and then you'll be able to see license service inside of here. So that's really the process in the background that's running alongside the software manager. So if I go ahead and open this up, this is going to be our Cimco software manager. And you can see that all the products that in the license that I just create or just installed here are going to be enabled in that license. So this would be a good way to kind of show what the options are inside of the Cimco software manager as well. So the license that you just installed, you can take a look at it, and we can look at the particular licenses here. It'll show if you have any DNC Max servers running as well. So we got a couple in the office that are running here. So we've got DNC Max ports, MDC Max ports, all that good stuff. These are actually handled by their particular products. So for instance, the DNC Max ports is going to be handled by the DNC Max server. And the rest of the licenses are going to be just our standalone software that we're going to be looking at. So if we look into the options side of things as well, we do have some AD reservations that we can set up as well. So these are kind of, if we want to essentially, one license is always going to pull for one computer, we can reserve that within this window. So if we look at a few of the settings tabs here as well, we can see that the license server is running off of a specific TCP port, and that's going to be 4460. I don't recommend changing this. If that port's being used by something else on your servers, we can change that up potentially, but by default, you should be completely fine with just running 4460 here. So at this point, if I go in and I say Cimco Edit, we're going to get that same window that we saw with just installing as a standalone license, but instead of going to key file and finding that key file, what we'll do is going over to license server here. And at this point, we can type in the IP address of where that license server is located at. So this is local to my computer. So what I can do is say localhost and then contact that server. And then if I go back into my software manager here, let me just minimize this really quick. We can see that my computer itself is now pulling that license from the software manager here. So if I go and close this out, this is going to increment back up to 4 available. So it'll give you a lot of information, especially on different events that happens, people that pull the licenses here as well. That can be exported out, for records, or it could be cleared out just to kind of clear up space inside of there if we're debugging any license issues. So that's going to be where our software manager kind of lies here. It's very, very straightforward. The locations for all these is going to be standard in Cimco, and then your software manager is going to lie right in that root folder here, just like any of our other products that we're looking at. So that's really all that needs to be done on the software manager side for the generic Cimco products here. So we do have the Cimco probing licenses, which is actually going to be on a completely different software manager. So switching gears here. So instead of our Cimco software manager that we just covered, the Cimco probing license, if you are using a networkable key for Cimco probing, that's going to be located in C program files, Cimco PP, and your software manager here. So if I had a network license running for Cimco probing, that license would show up in our software manager here, in this particular one. So you can see there's a different title to this window, and then we would go ahead and choose our license. Since we're a reseller, we have a reseller key, we essentially don't need a license for it, but this is where you would go ahead and that same process, you would choose that file and then go ahead and start that up. And that would be broadcast over the same network that your clients are using. So that'd be the main difference between your Cimco PP software manager, going to be covering our probing, and then our Cimco software manager is going to be handling any of the other products really. So if you are trying to activate an offline license as well, we do have a process for that we can easily send you over some documentation that walks you right through it. But essentially what happens is the software will allow you to create a request file. And all we need to do is go to cimco.com/support/activate software. And then once that request file is generated, we would go ahead and choose that file. After we upload that file, it's going to essentially create a create a .activation file that you can put into the server that does not have internet access. And after that, the license is activated for that particular computer. So the process is, on the computer that does not have internet access, we would then generate that activation file from there, take that activation file, bring it to a computer that does have internet access, and at that point we can go through this process on cimco.com/support/activate software. And then once that's all done, we bring that activation right back over to the server that doesn't have internet access, and then we can activate that file. So if you are a customer that is using Cimco MDM as well, there's a little bit of a difference on the licensing. We can pull this open here again. So I do have some MDM clients inside of here as well. So if you are using that, we do have a standalone Cimco MDM server that you have to incorporate that license into. So I'll go ahead and run that here. And this is going to be what your server version looks like for Cimco MDM. If I go into my license info, you can see it's licensed to the same key that I just installed on my software manager. By default, this will either be blank or say, you know, maybe trial version expired, something like that. At this point, we can go in and say select license, and then on my desktop, I do have the, let's see, SWI. I can go in and then actually incorporate that license into here. So at that point, you can go ahead and start that Cimco MDM server up, and then you're able to use those products. So fairly straightforward here. If any questions do show up, tech support is also available for any of this. So we have a lot of documentation that's always written up that we can send over your way, or hop on a remote session, things like that, to help you out. But that's really the long and short of all of it here. So I do appreciate everyone for coming today. Matt, I'll throw it back to you here.
All right, cool. Thanks, Joe. All right, but that was about all we had today. So again, I want to thank everyone for their time. Appreciate you for attending today. Joe, thanks for assisting with this. And everybody have a good rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated.